What am I doing here? That's fine. I guess just leave this all alone for now. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna mute it while I take attendance. So see you later, Mom. Okay, I'm unmuted. I didn't want a live transcript, so I'll turn on live transcript. Hopefully people can see me and hear me. It's muted, video's going. Good. Put that there. What month, special month is it? Yes, Ms. Shaw? No, Smith? Smith. It is Black History Month. And in order to honor and celebrate that throughout the next month during class, I will present some Black Catholic history, mainly American, well, only Catholic, Black Catholic American history, since we're in America. So present to you people who were figures, important figures for the history of Black Catholicism in the United States. Yes, there are African Americans who are Catholic, many of them, many millions of them, believe it or not. And this gentleman was one of them. His name, is anyone familiar with him? Do you recognize him? Maybe, yes, maybe not. His name was John Augustus Tolton. John Augustus Tolton, sometimes given as Augustine. Tolton. Born, I think I have my notes here, 1854, but let me check my notes. My notes here, come on. Yes, 1854 in Missouri, in the state of Missouri, out in the Midwest. He was born to, at least his mother was Catholic. I don't know if his father was. And they were slaves. Let us consider the date and consider where they were. Missouri, which was, I don't know if Missouri was officially a slave state. I forget. I think it was officially a slave state. Well, it had to have been because they were slaves. It was a slave state. So they were living in Missouri. Their owners were Catholic, which is probably how they came to Catholicism. And let me say that again. Their owners were Catholics. And again, their owners were Catholics. But that's how they came to the faith, apparently. And so his father, actually, interestingly enough, his father, once the Civil War, notice this is pre-Civil War by a few years when he was born. The Civil War started, was it 1860, I believe. Officially 1860, no, I think it was 1860, officially 1861, I think. But anyways, 1860, and his father ran off to join the Union Army. So his father was a hero. I mean, he went to join the Union Army to fight against the Confederacy and against slavery. His mother, who was still enslaved, stayed with the family, serving as their maid, but eventually left, crossed over the Mississippi River into Illinois, which was not a slave state, apparently. And that's how he and his family gained their freedom. Now, he was, as I said, a Catholic as his family was, and he had the stirrings or the desire to be a priest. He had gone to Catholic school, which was kind of interesting because it was an all-white school, and he was the one Black person there, which was a rather interesting scenario for that time. Even in the North, even what we might consider, the non-slave states, the place where slavery was illegal, it didn't happen. That doesn't mean there wasn't racism and bigotry. People didn't enslave African Americans, but whites still didn't seem to really want them around either. So it was unusual that the parish priest allowed him to be in the school. Once Augustus tried to go to the seminary, though, to fulfill his desire to be a priest, at least in America, that wasn't going to happen. No seminary would accept him. So what happened is that they shipped him off to Rome which is not actually a bad deal if you think about it. You know, you're getting some international travel, you're going to this beautiful city, beautiful food, great food. So he went off to Rome and there studied for the priesthood, where he was ordained. He was ordained a priest in Rome, and he was sent back to the United States, sent back to Illinois. He was made a pastor of a church, St. Joseph's Church in Illinois. But again, it wasn't the South, but it also wasn't very open to people who were not of European extraction. So his pastorate did not last very long. People didn't want him there. You know, whites didn't want him there. They didn't want a black priest, even though they were Catholics and he was Catholic. He was a priest, a religious leader. You know, he'd be ordained in Rome, where the Pope is. I'm not saying he was ordained by the Pope himself, but he was ordained like in the center of Catholicism. That wasn't good enough. So they moved him on. They moved him up to Chicago and put him in a parish there, where he died eventually. Obviously, he's not still alive. But unfortunately, he died at a very young age. He died at the age of 43. So he died at a very young age. What did I write down his date of death? I thought it was 18. Well, add 43 to 54, Dr. Dunn. So 97. 1897. So that's a little bit sad. At least for me, it's a little bit sad that he died such a young man. But people loved him. He was loved at his parish, at least his parish in Chicago. He was known as Good Father Gus, after his, well, you could say it's his middle name, I guess, but he's commonly called Augustus Tolton, even though his first name is technically John. And this man is on his way to sainthood. He is now considered Venerable John Augustus Tolton. He was brought up, you know, they opened his cause for canonization, as they say, to become recognized as a holy man, a saint in the Catholic Church. And so it went through the opening processes where you declare, you look to see, did the person live a holy life, live a good life, an exemplary life, better than other people. And they came to the conclusion that he did, so he was declared a servant of God. He was worthy of that. But did he do it heroically? You know, is he consistent in it? Okay, that's one of the things you also look for. You're not looking for miracles yet. You're looking for the life. You're not looking for all the bling and the baba, you know, the fireworks. You're looking for, did the person on a day-to-day basis live the Christian life and live it to a consistent and even honorable degree? And they determined that he did. So he was declared venerable. What does that mean? He is able to be venerated now, officially. So you can pray to Augustus Tolton as a saint, ask for his prayers. Hopefully, eventually, he'll reach the status of blessed and then finally officially a saint. But who knows? That takes time. They have to kind of, there's a whole thing. I mean, they have to gather details about the person's life. They do eventually have to look for miracles, for confirmation of the person's holiness, etc. and so forth. So I ask you, good Father Gus, holy and honorable man, Augustus Tolton, to please pray for me and for all of us, that we may live in peace and love with each other and not hate each other for what we see as different, because the Jesus whom you serve died for all of us. And in his name I pray, amen. Pray for us. Okay. Let's finish up with Pope St. John Paul II. Last little bit from this PowerPoint slide. I didn't notice it doing this last time, but maybe I just wasn't paying attention. Doesn't matter. And I've pretty much said what I wanted to say in other ways, so I don't think I have to say much about the reading from John Paul II. just to maybe explain the context, and the context is that he is giving an address, a talk, to one of the offices in the Vatican. Okay, the Pope is a busy man. You know, he's got a lot to do, and there's a whole bureaucracy to help him in his administration of not just his local diocese of Rome, the Church of Rome in Rome, but also the worldwide Catholic Church that looks up to him for leadership. And one of these offices is called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or simply CDF. CDF is how it's commonly abbreviated. And what does the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith do? Well, as its name suggests, it's concerned with the doctrine of the faith, the teaching of the faith, passing on the Christian Catholic faith. And does the Pope do that? Well, yes, he does, but they help him more formally in doing that, specifically by answering questions or addressing issues in the Catholic world in matters of teaching or the faith, where there might be problems or things that need to be clarified, or people might have questions about the faith. And the CDF will answer, oftentimes in the name of the Pope, not always, sometimes just giving its own response, but always in union with the Pope. The Pope should know what they're up to, what they're doing. And so he frequently, I should say frequently, but will many times meet with them throughout the year, and with the members of the CDF, with the office, and he'll give a speech. Oftentimes he'll give a speech. That's usually what popes do. They're kind of like politicians. They show up and give speeches all the time. Maybe kiss a few babies and stuff like that. So he showed up and he gave a speech to them. And that's that brief talk that he gave to them on this one occasion back in, I think, the year 2000, I had or asked you to read, because it just gives a very brief and briefing but good summary of the Catholic position. And some of these things, as I said, I've already mentioned, so I don't really feel the need I have to go into them again or beat a dead horse. But there was some confusion that he wanted to address. One of those things was, a bit more. Doesn't want to. No, well, I guess I have to do that. Maybe that's not gonna. I shouldn't have done that. Fix it. There we go. I pressed the number 1. There we go. Okay. There are some things, like there was some confusion. People got the idea from the more positive view that the Catholic Church was taking towards other religions, that therefore it was a kind of a change in teaching or change in belief, that the Church at Vatican II was trying to somehow say that Jesus is not unique amongst other religious founders, but that Jesus was just one of many saviors or revealers, or that belonging to the church was not necessary anymore. You know, if you could be a good Muslim or a good Hindu or a good atheist, that was enough, and you didn't really need to seek out the truth to find where the full truth was. And if you found it or thought you found it, you didn't have to act upon it by, for example, being baptized or becoming a Christian. And the Pope says, no, that's not what we're going for here. That's not what Vatican II was trying to say. And that's not what I'm certainly not saying as the Pope. So he had to remind Catholics that these views were not in accordance with their belief system. He says Jesus is unique. He is the definitive standard by which Christians judge reality, judge ultimate reality. And he is complete. There's nothing lacking in the revelation that God has given through him. In fact, that revelation is finished. The church is not, with Jesus, Christianity is not looking for other revelations. Okay? Say, for example, in the Quran, which Muhammad claims that the Quran is kind of a completion of the revelation to Christianity, and also the completion of God's revelation to the Jews. Muhammad accepted that God had revealed himself to Israel and to the Christians, but that their revelations were kind of incomplete, and his Quran completes that. Well, Pope clearly doesn't accept that. With Jesus, the revelation has been completed. So he rejects the idea that other religions, while we look at them positively, they're not somehow complements to Jesus, the revelation of God in Jesus, or they're not complements to the church. And how does the church come into play? Well, because the church is the group. What's the connection to Jesus? Well, the connection is a very real one. The church is the group that Jesus himself apparently established to go out and bring his message to the world. So it's not like there's Jesus here all by his lonesome, and then there's this other group we call the church. You can call that group whatever word you want, okay? It doesn't have to be church or whatever. In fact, they didn't call themselves the church in the beginning. They called themselves the way, you know? They didn't really have a word for it. They certainly didn't call themselves Christians. But Jesus intentionally organizes a group of people. He chooses people on his own and tells them, I want you to go out and bring my message to the world. First to Israel, to the Jews, because we're Jews, and then eventually to the world. So the church is also necessary, is a necessary part. Why? Because Jesus made it a necessary part. And Jesus is the standard. So the church has that obligation to still go out and proclaim that truth to the world. Okay, fine. That's that. Now we're going to look at one of those world religions, Hinduism, or start looking at the world religions. Whoops. All right, hold on. There we go. And this, you know, the perspective of that I've told you that we read that small address, short address, as Pope St. John Paul II gave, is the perspective I'm coming from, okay? So I'm going to give you a descriptive account of these religions. I'm going to talk about them, but I might also talk about how I view them from my outsider perspective as a Christian. Not a negative view, but I might point out things, well, this is really interesting. This is an interesting idea. We think this in Christianity, don't we? So that might go on. But I'm always looking at it from the perspective of my belief in Jesus Christ as a Catholic theologian. Hinduism. Hinduism is India. Hinduism is India. Hinduism, as a religion, has about 5,000 plus years of history that we know of, that, you know, recorded history. It goes back as far back as 5,000 years that we know of. So it's very old, very old. And with Judaism, we can say that Hinduism is one of, oh, and I apologize for that. I didn't realize that the closed captioning goes over some of the text there. So I think I'm going to have to turn it off for a second. But anyways, with Judaism, Hinduism is one of the most ancient of the world's living religions, of the religions that human beings still celebrate and follow, because there have been religions in the past that are no more. They're not with us anymore, but we know they existed. But of the ancient, very ancient religions, going far so back, even before recorded history, we would have Hinduism and Judaism. In fact, Hinduism is so old that it has no founder. There's no one we can really point to say that he or she started it. Unlike other religions, like say Christianity, where Jesus, I mentioned Jesus, Islam, Muhammad, Buddhism, the Buddha, Gautama Siddhartha, okay, and other religions I could name. We know who founded them. We know they started with a certain person. That's not the case with religions like maybe you could make a case for Judaism and Abraham, but I digress. We'll talk about that when we get to Judaism. But certainly with Hinduism, there's no one you can point to say, okay, that's the first Hindu, that's the founder of the religion. There is none. And there's no official creed, so you can't impose like a Judeo-Christian structure on it, or even, I should say more appropriately, a Christian structure, where in Christianity, people talk about the Bible as the source of God's revelation, and people are like, oh, what does the Bible say? And they look in the Bible for guidance and for viewpoint, for their belief system. Or Catholics have creeds. So if you ever go to a Catholic mass, at one point, Catholics stand up and say a whole belief. They state their beliefs every Sunday and holy days of obligation. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hinduism doesn't really have that. It doesn't really have an official creed so that you believe this as a Hindu. So you find a lot of different kinds of belief in Hinduism, but there does seem to be a unifying entity, which is, come back to it, India, Mother India. This babe, which is a picture of Mata Bharat, Mother India as a goddess. And India itself exists in Hinduism as a goddess that people can worship. So it's not just Americans who worship their country. In God we trust. I think it's the money. I don't know if it's God himself, but anyways, but people can worship their countries. In Hinduism, they literally worship India. She's even a goddess. India is a goddess, Mother India. According to the Pew Research Center, as of 2015, there were around just a little over 1 billion Hindus. People we could say were Hindus. The Pew Research Center, which is a sociological organization that does all sorts of 2015, the report of 2015, which does all sorts of studies of politics, culture, society, religion, all sorts of stuff. Science. I'm, of course, obviously very much interested in religion, so I really enjoy the sociological reports that they put out on religion, all sorts of things, the state of religious belief in America, religious tolerance throughout the world, what do Catholics believe about this? And they go out and they ask people questions and they crunch the data, they look for correlations, how many Catholics actually go to mass on any given Sunday? They figure out, well, this is the number, and then they ask people, how many Muslims really believe in this belief? They go out and they ask people who identify as Muslims, and they crunch numbers and they come back. And I think at least one of the readings is from the Pew Research Center that I give you. I might give you another one, but at least one, I think, where it says most Indians, they found out from their study, most Indians do not actually practice yoga, even though yoga is often associated with Hinduism and with India. Actually, most Indians do not practice it on a regular basis. In fact, you probably have more people here in Dallas practicing yoga than you might find people in Bangalore, or Bengaluru, I should say, in the south of India. So there are 1 billion, we can say there are 1 billion Hindus, but I remember what it says in the textbook in the first chapter. I mean, pinning down actual numbers is hard, because when I say there are 1 billion Hindus, I mean, there are, I think, 1.2 billion people who live in this country of India. Not all of them are Hindus. Most of them would identify as that. But then again, out of the 1 billion, say the 1 billion who might identify as Hindu, how many really practice, So numbers can be deceptive. It doesn't tell you who's really practicing, who really doesn't practice, okay? But it's something. It's something, and it gives us a benchmark to show why it is a world religion. It's an influential religion on the world stage. Where is Hinduism located? Even though this course is called World Religions, it doesn't necessarily mean the whole world. And what do I mean by that? I mean, a religion can have a worldwide impact, even if it's not, if it dispersed throughout the world. Some religions are, Christianity, Islam, but other religions have a big impact while being centered in certain areas. Judaism, it's a very small religion, mostly centered now in Israel and, for the most part, the United States. Hinduism is mostly centered, as I said, in India and the surrounding countries. So India and I gotta get a pointer or something. I gotta buy something, a little stick. If I find a stick, maybe I'll get that. Anyways, I saw a stick when I was walking in here today. Maybe I'll pick it up on the way. Okay. All the way up there, you can see the country of Nepal wedged right between China and India. There's a small country of Nepal. That's Hindu. So India stands to reason because they're right there on top of each other. You'll find a lot of Hindus in places like Bangladesh. Okay, not so much in Pakistan, which is largely Muslim, not so much in China, not so much in Bhutan either. Nepal is interesting because up until recently, maybe the last 10 or 15 years, maybe just 10 years, it was the only Hindu kingdom on the planet. It had an absolute king reigning as an absolute monarch, but then you had Marxist rebels, communists who were trying to overthrow that. And then one of the princes, the Sun princes, decided to massacre the royal family, went into like the building and shot most of the royal family to death or had them killed. And that kind of brought, it wasn't fun to be an absolute monarch of Nepal anymore. So they transitioned into, I don't know if I'd say well, I guess they're a democracy. I don't think the Marxists got them the Marxist state that they wanted, they become a communist country, a Marxist country. So I'd have to look at what its political system. I do think it transitioned to democracy with the monarchy still there as kind of like a constitutional monarchy, just a figure, the king is a figurehead. But anyways, those are recent developments. Up until then, it was an absolute monarchy, an absolute Hindu monarchy. So that's mainly where Hinduism is located. Where does the word come from? And here I have to turn off for a moment the transcription element here so that you can see the words at the bottom. Or maybe what I'll do is I'll just, so now it's not showing the thing. Okay, so it's not showing the controls. No, it's fine. Little controls to end the show. It's in the options, but I'm not going to bother with the options. Okay. So if you look at the bottom of the PowerPoint, you'll see where the word Hindu comes from. Where does it come from? It actually comes from a Sanskrit word, and we've heard about Sanskrit before. Sanskrit is an ancient language that was spoken mainly throughout northern India. It does not actually come from India, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But this ancient dead language of Sanskrit, and this river here that you can see actually is in Pakistan. You can see it here. I don't know if you can make it out, but it says the Indus River. Can you see that? I-N-D-U-S. Can you see Indus? Yes, no, people in the back? Can you see it or no? Yes? Okay. This in Sanskrit was called the Sindhu River. The Sindhu River. When that word was heard by people from Iran over in this area, and you might say, well, why is he referring to Iran? Well, I'm trying to kind of take you down the path of how it entered into English. Because they were calling it Sindhu. And the Iranians who are over here, not on the map, but there's great old Iranian culture. And in fact, the language of Iran is Farsi, Persian, which is, again, it's not, people think like, oh, people from Iran, oh, they're like Shiite Muslims, they must be Arabs. No, they're not Arabs. And the language they speak is not Arabic. The Persian is an Indo-European language. It's one of the cousins of us, of English and Latin and Sanskrit and this whole language family, okay? It's not Arabic at all, which is Arabic is in a totally different language family. So they had a huge cultural influence in this area of Iran. And when they heard this word Sindhu, they said Hindu. Okay, they dropped the S for some reason. Well, that happens a lot. You know, for example, we say 6. But if you take math, and I know a lot of you have to take math because of your majors and stuff, You might know that if you take geometry and I talk about a hexagon, what's a hexagon? La, da, da, dee, da, da, da. What's a hexagon? Do, 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 do. Da, 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 da. A hexagon. A hex that is left. Well, since no one's going to answer me, I'll just move on. A hexagon is a six-sided figure. Why is it not a sixagon? Because the word is from Greek, and in Greek they drop the S, just like with the Persians, the Iranians. S became a H sound for some reason. I don't know why. That let me pick it up. So it's a hexagon. Okay, not a. It's not. We say six. We still have the S. They say hex. Interestingly enough, there's a hexagonal shape on, I believe, the North Pole of Saturn in the clouds, which astronomers are still trying to understand how a perfect geometric shape is embedded in one of the poles of a gaseous planet like Saturn. But that's what makes life interesting. You know, you find weird things in nature. Anyways. Hexia. So they said Hindu, and that's how it came into English as Hindu. But if you follow it back, Hindu, Sindhu, you'll see that if quite literally is rooted in India, even though the even though the Indus River, the Sindhu, is located now in the modern country of Pakistan, forget about modern borders. I mean, those were drawn by people a long time after the fact, okay? There was no Pakistan 5,000 years ago, okay? When these civilizations arose, right? It was all considered part of India. And so they named themselves by the place, the river they lived on, where the civilization seems to have kind of grown. People settled and built cities. The Indus River. So Hindu is quite literally part of India. It's this river where the first Indians, you might say, settled. So that's how they call themselves. At least that's where we got the word from into English. There we go. As I told you before, well, I'll get to that in a second. Let me finish with, I'm still on Sindhu, but anyways. Where did this word Hindu, where did it arise from? Well, around the 1200s, it was actually, all right, I'll skip over that, I think. I forget about that. I will go to the next slide. I'm done with Sindhu. Well, I'm not done with Sindhu. I'm still going to talk about it. But when I talked about religion and I went over various words, dharma, threskeia, Tao, all these different words that human cultures have used to kind of talk about this experience of ultimate reality, all right? And I told you that, people didn't really have a word for religion. I mean, it was in fact a modern invention. Western scholars took the word religio from Latin and applied it to these different systems. Okay, that doesn't mean that there aren't religions. I didn't agree with the view that religion is undefinable or that it doesn't exist amongst humans. I think it does. But some religions, just to show you how old this religion is, again, they don't have a word for religion. They don't call it Hinduism, even though we do. Even though it came into our language as Hindu. I guess if you could get to an official title for Hinduism amongst Hindus, they call it the eternal law, the eternal dharma, the everlasting order and foundation of everything, the universe. Sanatana Dharma, or sometimes pronounced Sanatan Dharma. Sometimes they drop the final A in Sanskrit. But that is how they perceive it. Like there has never been a time when Hinduism didn't exist, and in fact, it exists from all eternity. So from say a Hindu perspective, their belief system is the eternal reality. It's existed before any other religion. It is the primordial, the first religion, in a manner of speaking. So Hinduism develops as it comes into English speaking, or the English language as Hindu, as a concept. We use it to mean as an umbrella term that encompasses a whole family of religious beliefs. The only thing, and I know I'm harping on this point, but it's a good point to make again, the only thing that seems to unite Hinduism is its origins on the Indian subcontinent, Mother India. Did I do that? Yeah. And so you have a statement from a famous gentleman like this, Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, who was the second president of the Indian Republic after, not remember that India fought for, well, didn't fight really. I shouldn't say they won't fight at all. Gandhi was a pacifist, but they were able to get the British to leave India and to recognize that they were now an independent nation in the late 40s. And this man was the second president of that republic, which came of it. I know that fascinates me, but I'm just thinking of something. Anyways, and it was this gentleman, Radhakrishnan. Hinduism is more of a culture than a creed. It's more than just a belief system, because it's such a large kind of a big tent. Hinduism is such a big tent with all sorts of different kind of practices and beliefs. The only thing that really unites them really is maybe the culture of India where they all sprang up. It's not to say that you cannot find commonalities. As we'll see later, there are beliefs that pretty much all these various shades of Hinduism, of things we call Hindu, believe in and share. Things like reincarnation, that would be a big one. Karma, the gods, for the most part. Not all, but for the most part. But certainly reincarnation and karma will be two big ones that are shared by just about every flavor of Hinduism you might encounter. But his point is well taken. It's more of a culture than a creed, okay? Is it still a religion? I'd say yes, it is, because it's still dealing with an ultimate reality. When you're claiming that the source of ultimate reality is in your belief system, I think that's a religious claim, okay? He's not claiming that necessarily about the nation state of India, but he's claiming it certainly about the area of India, okay? So for each religion, how I like to proceed, and this is no big invention of mine. I mean, you'll find this in, I think, the textbook and other textbooks, is to give a little bit of historical background, very brief, because obviously, especially with a religion this old, you can't do anything except, not even scratch the surface. Maybe just blow a little breath on the surface, But I do like to give some historical background, and then I'll go into what are their sources of authority. Do they have sacred writings? Okay, where do they have a revelation from a god or from a founder or something? Okay, by which becomes their standard for believing things. And then I follow into, like, what are some of the major beliefs? Not all the beliefs, but what are some of the major beliefs that characterize this religious system? Okay, that you could look at it and say, okay, that's perceivably Hindu, or that's clearly Christian. Okay, and so that's how I do it. And then after that, we'll see what happens. I'll show a video or something of stuff that's funny or I find interesting about the religion or thought-provoking. Hinduism begins, we can say, at least archaeologically, with the Indus Valley civilization. Okay, this group of settlements that start a long time ago, around 5,000 years ago, from what we can tell, on this river called the Indus River, the Sindhu in Sanskrit. Now the dates here, well, anyways, so the dates are from around 3000 to 1500 BC is what scholars will call the Indus Valley civilization. And it was only, and I looked this up, I was looking for stuff. Yeah, apparently, Europeans knew about these settlements as early as the 1800s, but they didn't have the wherewithal or the ability, or at least no one took the time to start official excavations of some of these sites that European people encountered, because they weren't there for that. Sometimes they were there because the British military was there, or they were just businessmen who were trying to open trade. So they didn't have it. They might be interested and say, "Oh wow, there's looks like a really old city there. It might be interesting to dig it up," but then didn't do anything about it. So as far back as the 1800s, Europeans, mind you, had some idea that there was some ancient civilization apparently there, at least some old towns. But it was not until like the 1920s and the 1930s that the archaeological excavations began in the Indus Valley on some of these sites that people saw were there, but didn't know. They looked like cities, but they didn't know what. The 1920s and the 1930s. I tried to find out if excavations have continued, but I couldn't find any definite information. So there might have been. I'm not saying that there were no further excavations after the 1930s. Okay, I just couldn't find any more information about it. But certainly throughout those 20 years, European archaeologists, well, I should say just European archaeologists, local archaeologists as well, started digging up some of these sites, and they found things maybe you've heard of, maybe you encounter some of this stuff if you did like world history in high school. You might have heard of something like the Harappa culture or the great city of Mohenjo-Daro. All of these sites are now, even though they're called the Indus Valley and they're kind of packaged with Indian civilization, as you saw from the map, now with modern political borders, they're located in Pakistan. So what happened? The archaeologists started uncovering these cities, and what seemed to be, they covered these city cultures, and what seemed to be a homogeneous, unified kind of culture, what seemed to be emerging from what they were finding in the evidence that they dug up. There seemed to be a political and religious unity amongst the peoples living in the Indus Valley. It was a high civilization. The cities were well planned. Okay, they weren't haphazard. I mean, there was thought behind the cities. And so the oldest of these was the Harappa culture, as you can see. Well, I shouldn't say that. Why did I put that there? Well, maybe that's more accurate than what I have on my page. The Harappa culture, which seems to have existed, at least from the evidence they could dig up, from around 2600 BC until 1700 BC. And it was located on the Ravi River, which is a modern day Pakistan, in the area. I know it's not technically the Indus River, but it's in the area of the Indus River Valley. And then the other great one, which is on the Indus River, is Mohenjo-Daro. And if you follow the arrow there, you will see what they excavated of this great city, Mohenjo-Daro. You can see in the front here, there's what they call the Great Bath. It appears to have been, well, what the name means, a bath, a huge container of water, not container, but a huge structure containing water for people to go in, to bathe, and do whatever. Who knows? I wasn't there. And you find this in a lot of cultures. You find this in Roman culture, Greek culture, a lot of cultures where they would build baths for people to go and to talk. It was like a place to get together, and swim and do all sorts of stuff, purify yourself. What else did they find? Well, they found a lot of things, but I'm just going to focus on some interesting stuff. They found this, which they call the Pashupati seal, at Mohenjo-Daro, which I just showed you. And there are just the dates of, they think that Mohenjo-Daro also was active, or, around the same time that the Harappa culture was, 2600 to 1900 BC, maybe a little bit less than the Harappa culture, I think. But anyways, so they found this. They found a number of things like this. They're called seals, which is what they kind of call impressions that are pressed into clay, into wet soil in a way, wet dirt, and baked and stuff like that. So people create seals with images on them. And they found this image, which was very interesting. It has all sorts, excited the archaeologists, because it shows this figure. This figure seems to, they don't know necessarily who it is, but what you can see from the figure is it's some kind of human type figure, although it does have three faces. It has the face looking out to you, but there are faces on either side, on the left and the right. It's sitting what seems to be in a yogic posture, a posture of yoga, where you do the leg thing, which ain't gonna happen with me given my girth, but whatever. I guess I could try it if I fall off the table. But it seems to be, a yogic posture where you take the legs and put yourself into a pretzel. On top, I'm not sure what's on top. Horns. Yeah, it's interesting. There's lettering on the very top, and these pictures around here are animals, little pictures of animals that are surrounding this figure. And in the center is, what archaeologists discreetly call a phallus. In a lot of ancient religions, let's just say the aroused male was a common theme. I don't know why, and women with big breasts. So he seems to have an erect penis. Okay, we're all adults here, and you find this in apparently a lot of ancient cultures. What does that mean? Probably fertility, big breasts on women for nursing children, and if they're kind of looking pregnant, and like that, and for the male, it would be the phallus, the penis. So fertility. And if it's erect, it means you're very fertile because you're always using it. You're taking Viagra all the time. Anyways, what is this picture of? Well, maybe it's Shiva. So, what kind of got the imagination of a lot of archaeologists was someone who proposed that that looks like later representations of this Hindu god Shiva, whom we will encounter later, probably next week sometime, I think. And this god Shiva actually is called Lord of the Beasts, the controller, the ruler of the animals. And because this thing, of course, you're going through some steps here. You're assuming that this is actually a picture of a god. There's nothing to indicate it's a god, okay? Except maybe the three faces, because gods are weird. But the being surrounded by animals, that's what brought it to this one scholar's attention that maybe this is Shiva, Lord of Beasts. Shiva, yes, is considered the ruler of the animals in Hinduism, and Shiva also is associated very much with yoga. Shiva is often depicted in the yoga position with his legs crossed. The problem with that theory is that Shiva is not really represented having three faces, or four, because you can't see behind the head. There might be a fourth face. Why is that important? Because if that's the case, then it could be Brahma, who's another Hindu god, the creator god, not in the sense of the Jewish and Christian creator god, okay? Brahma himself was created, all right? But he's kind of like the orderer of the universe, so he's considered like a creator god. Well, Brahma has 3 or 4 faces. Why? It's a symbol. It's meant to show that he sees everywhere. He has eyes pointing in all directions, so he's all-knowing. He sees everywhere and sees everything. Shiva doesn't have that typically. Also, what's going on with the horns on top of the, apparently horns, some kind of headdress going on that's on top. So it's not completely clear that it's necessarily a Hindu god. It's also not completely clear that that is a yogic position. How do a person sits down and crosses his legs? Does that immediately become yoga? I remember when I was a kid, and I don't think this was meant to be offensive in any way, but when I was a kid and you were at school or something, the teacher would say, okay, sit down on the floor Indian style. And they didn't mean Indian, they meant Native American, because that was like a stereotypical, I don't know why they thought Native Americans sat in that way, but just because a person sits down on the ground with his or her legs crossed doesn't mean he's doing yoga or she's doing yoga. So again, people rebutted or responded to that view and said, look, you might be reading later Hindu practices and symbology into this seal of the Pashupati seal, and it may have no connection at all. But it is interesting. But who knows? But it is interesting. And maybe it does have connections, but nevertheless, it does not take away from the fact that it came from the Indus Valley civilization, which seems to have been very influential on the development of later Hinduism. Now we move into what is called the Vedic or the pre-classical period. Vedic because that refers to the Vedas. The Vedas are about as close as you will come to like a Bible in Hinduism. It's kind of like, I'm not trying to be flip or dismissive of anyone who might be Hindu, but just to use images and words that will help bridge that gap so you understand. And if you're a Christian or a Jew, you understand Bible, right? So the Vedas are kind of like the Bible of Hinduism. It's a set of, actually 4 sets of sacred writings, which we'll talk about eventually, that are considered coming directly from, well, you could say the gods, but coming out of the divine reality that is Sanatana Dharma, okay? It's conceived as kind of like a godlike reality. It's not really a god in and of itself, but it comes out of this godlike ultimate reality. And the Vedas, these books, are part of that. They derive from that. And in this period, from 1500 until 500 BC, scholars believe that the Vedas were written, they were composed and brought together. And hence it's called the Vedic period, but also pre-classical. It's before maybe the classical period, where the society kind of starts hitting its high point before maybe there's a decline. What makes this period interesting is what's called the Aryan migration theory. It used to be called the Aryan invasion theory, and that's really not what scholars call it today, because it was more of a migration, a movement, than an invasion, okay? The words matter, and it wasn't really groups like warriors groups that were coming in and fighting and conquering territory. It was more like migrants. People migrated into the area. They moved. Why is it called Aryan? Because in the Vedas, which were written in Sanskrit, the Vedas refer to a group of people referred to by this word Aryas, the noble ones, the honored ones, okay? The ones who are higher up than other groups, okay? So you see a little bit of a superior attitude to the use of that word by this group that was migrating in. We're better than the locals, okay, than the natives. So that's where Aryan comes from. You can see it has nothing to do with white Europeans, or some neo-Nazi from Mississippi. So, some guy from Mississippi could say, I belong to the Aryan nation, white power, baby. Well, I don't know that the Aryans were, they weren't, I don't think they're related to Europeans, that we'll find out, but I don't think they were white necessarily, white American. Nevertheless, the Aryans. Our buddy, Max Mueller, actually, the linguist and scholar from Oxford, was the first one to kind of see this. And he wasn't an archaeologist, but remember, he was a language scholar, and he was an expert in Sanskrit. And he noticed that Sanskrit was different from the other southern languages of India. And it was related to a whole grouping of languages stretching from northern India all the way over to Europe, to the ocean, to Ireland, really. We couldn't go any farther. And this might require just a bigger map than what I have here. Gay Bar 1980. How'd that get on there? Da, 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 da. Good times. Doobie doo. Da 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 dee. Stormy weather. There we go. Let's get out of far out here. Let's get a good view. No, that's not even. Okay, yeah. So not just Mueller, but other scholars like him who studied languages noticed that there were all sorts of languages stretching from northern India, going all the way up into Europe, and forget about Iceland and Greenland, even though they're technically are part of Europe, but they were colonized much later, but going all the way till the end of the Atlantic Ocean. And they all seem to be part of the same language family. And so Sanskrit was one of them. So he noticed through his, there we go, through his language study that there were these similarities, and he theorized from that there was some connection, that there seemed to be, maybe there was some movement of people who spoke this language called Indo-European, India to Europe, so Indo-European. There seemed to be some linguistic connection uniting these groups. So maybe it showed that they spread out from a certain area, spread out into northern India, spread out west into Europe. What was the evidence for this? Well, okay, that was his idea. That was his idea. But now we have to see what were the evidence. Because a lot of scholars today would say that Mueller was right, that sometime around 2000, well, I have on the PowerPoint 1500 BC, but sometime during a period of from 2000 to 1500 BC, 2000 to 1500 BC, groups of what are called Indo-Europeans did migrate from the steppes, the grasslands of lower Siberia. That's what you can see on the map. Okay, this is lower Siberia, this is Siberia, this region. These are, a lot of this is forest and grassland, but these are all mountains here. But it seems that this region, just above the country of Iran, there were groups here called the Indo-Europeans, that we call them Indo-Europeans. Who knows what they call themselves? Probably just the people. But anyways, and they started at some point in time after, now remember, they came out of Africa. They came out of Africa and stopped here for some period of time. And somewhere around the 2000 BC started to move again. So they moved into northern India and they moved over to Europe. These people, when the Vedas were written, called themselves Aryans. What's the evidence? Well, I mentioned the evidence already. The Vedas, these writings in Sanskrit, were eventually written in their language, and they mention themselves, and they also mention, well, anyways, the language evidence is there. The connection to languages as far away as Ireland and France and stuff like that. But also the Vedas describe, the religious practices that are described in the Vedas are very different from what you find in later Hinduism. In fact, the religious practices are more in line with what scholars seem to know about the practices of these Indo-European tribes that were living in southern Siberia, rather than what developed in India. What were some of these differences? Well, for example, the Indo-Europeans, the Aryans, were more focused on nature worship. Maybe we'll write this down. They were more focused on nature worship. Okay, so nature worship. So gods of the storm, gods of the forest, or gods of mountain gods. So nature, gods of rain, sun, stuff like that. Okay, these were big for them. Also, animal sacrifice. So we had sacrifice but especially of horses. There's some, what I consider a weird reason. I don't know why, but I guess that's what they had. So instead of a sheep or a goat, they decided to sacrifice a horse. So horse sacrifices are talked about in the Vedas, which was not really, seems to have been a practice that was happening in India, the Indian subcontinent. Alcoholic drink, it was a sacred drink. It was a sacred drink called soma. All right. And, you find that kind of nexus or coming together of drugs in a lot of religions. Native American religions use peyote or stuff that they smoke, stuff that brings hallucinations or, mind-altering experiences. People in South America, Native Americans would chew coca plant or coca leaves and stuff like that. So it's the same kind of idea, all right? The Indo-Europeans seem to have a fermented drink, which came to be called soma in Hinduism. It was an alcoholic drink where it would alter your mind, and that would be connected with their religious practice. And also the caste system, that, again, there was this kind of over-under belief that there's certain groups that are better than other groups, and they kind of brought that with them. We're the noble ones, the newcomers, and so you kind of separate yourself off from the locals or the natives. You don't mix with them, although they kind of do, because the Aryans kind of disappear into India. But nevertheless, scholars believe that this idea of a caste system, where there are high people who are by nature higher up, and then there are lower levels beneath them. Now, in India, if you actually go to the country of India, this is a very controversial theory. People don't like the idea that something came from outsiders, and also, as I mentioned before, with neo-Nazis or the Aryan movement and white power, it was co-opted. Even in Max Muller's time, it was co-opted and reinterpreted in this kind of racialist view that the Aryans must have been these white-skinned invaders who established themselves over the dark-skinned natives, and so it had all sorts of racist connotations. And that's not what Mueller meant at all when he proposed the theory, and that's not what the Aryan migration theory is all about. But it is still a touchy subject, given India's history of having been colonized and kind of overlorded by Europeans for so long, the British, and not just white people, because the people, as we'll find out, Muslims also kept the Indians under their control, and the Muslims that invaded them were not white Europeans. So it can be a touchy subject, but the evidence seems to be there. And now that we have modern genetics, and geneticists can now, take a swab of saliva and start seeing, test it and see connections between, I'm not a geneticist, so I don't understand all the terminology, but I know it has something to do with the Y chromosome or whatever and other stuff. And they can see how things have diverged. Modern genetics has almost confirmed this idea. There does seem to be a connection between people living now in northern India with European groups farther away. So it's not just language that kind of gives it away that there's a connection, but now modern genetics has stepped in and said, yes, there does seem to be some proof to this linguistic theory of a connection between Europe and India. The classical period is 500 to 1000, 500 BC to 1000 AD. BC means before Christ, and AD means year of the Lord, Anno Domini. And, I'm just not going to use BCE and CE because there's no such thing as a common era. You can ask the historians in the history department. It's just a made-up term. So people don't want to know that our calendar is dated. So much of what we do is religious. Our calendar is based on the life of a man, Jesus, when he was born, when he came into existence. And some people don't like to to have that maybe pushed in their face, so they say BCE, before the Common Era, or the Common Era, but there is no such thing as the Common Era. And the Common Era seems to coincide exactly with the birth of Jesus anyway, so I don't know what the point is. Come up with something different, I guess is my point. I'll go along with that, I guess. So the classical period, by this time, the priestly caste, or group, I should say, remember, the Indo-Europeans brought this emphasis on sacrifice, sacrificing animals and things to their gods. And sacrifice necessitates a priesthood, people who are religious professionals, who are professionals in the rituals, the dharma, remember, of rightly sacrificing to the spirits and the gods. So the priests were very much in control during the classical period, but not for long, because there were protest movements around. And during this period of time, there were groups that rose up and had their own views. And so, for example, you have religions like Jainism and Buddhism. Jainism was not founded by, but kind of brought to completion by this man called Vardhamana, also known as Mahavira. Mahavira is his title. It's kind of like calling Jesus the Christ, Jesus Christ. Well, Vardhamana is his name. Mahavira means something like great champion, great conqueror. So he's also called that. And so he lived in the 500s. But then you had this other guy, Siddhartha, that's his first name actually, the family name comes first, who became enlightened and started this movement which came to be called Buddhism. When did he live? It's hard to know. There are two different chronologies, which we'll talk about when we get to Buddhism, but roughly around the 500s BC is when some Buddha seems to have lived in this period. This is a common symbol for the Jain religion, which is a very small religion. I think there are only about 4 million Jains in the whole world. Almost all of them are situated in India, except there is actually a Jain temple in New Jersey where I live. And I think while you're doing your course project, I'm going to make it my business to go there so I can go there for one of their events, because I'm fascinated by Jainism. I want to see what they do. Then we got this. We got Buddhism, the mandala wheel, some kind of times called a prayer wheel. You know, you offer some kind of invocation to the Buddha or some Buddhist god, because they do actually have gods in some forms of Buddhism. And you spin the wheel, but the wheel of Dharma, also it is a symbol of the wheel of the Buddha's teaching. Wheel of the Buddha's teaching. What kind of unites Buddhism and Jainism as protest movement? Mainly the fact that they rejected the authority of the Vedas. It's kind of like if you had Christians, you say we're Christians who came out and said we don't accept the Bible anymore. Okay, we reject its teachings. Okay, well now you've formed your own little religion, your own new religion, and that's what happens here. They're like, we're from India. Jainism and Buddhism arise in India, but we don't accept the Vedas of Hinduism. Okay, fine. So now you have this separation. You're now different groups within India. You're not Hindu particularly anymore. Okay, let's see. Okay, yes, I see the time. So I'll finish this next week. Have a good weekend. God bless you all. Okay. So really, it's one page. Really 2 pages. That's going to be, I got to remember that. I have to force myself and discipline myself with 2 pages. All right. Oh, it's hidden. It's hidden beneath the, there they are. But they're hidden beneath. Yes, just 1 second, please. Trying to, there we go. Okay, mute, stop video.